We are all connected. We breathe the same air. We eat from the same sources. We live in the same spaces. Humans, animals, plants, all together in a delicate balance.
It means the health of each relies on the health of the others. At the heart of this ecosystem is animal health. By taking care of it, we protect our living world. We make it thrive. We make it smile.
Since 1968, we've been striving to improve the health and welfare of a great variety of species. Every day at Virbac, we roll up our sleeves, searching for new ways and solutions for all those who take care of animals. Veterinarians, farmers, and pet owners all over the world.
We already share with them a wide range of pharmaceutical, biological, nutritional, and diagnostic solutions to prevent and treat the majority of pathologies.
And we continue to push things forward, linking their needs to the latest technological advances, side by side with all our partners, whether in universities, research centers, or with development and manufacturing organizations.
At Virbac, it's strong human relationships that unite and propel us.
We sincerely pay attention to each other, making sure that all of us feel part of one global diverse team, where everyone can seize the initiative, shake up ideas, create the difference.
That's what makes the Virbac adventure unique.
Above all, we constantly explore what lies beyond the horizon. That's the pioneer spirit that has always animated us.
Whether it's innovating responsibly, developing in a profitable and sustainable manner, safeguarding natural resources, or promoting higher ethical and quality standards, by shaping the future of animal health, we are committed to shaping a healthier future for our shared living home. All living beings together.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues. A very bright and spring wish to you all. Hope you remembered Secretary's Day today, which was the first Wednesday of the month of September. Welcome to the September Joburg SAVA branch monthly CPD event, still online, and we will remain online for the rest of the year. A warm welcome to the Joburg branch members as well as non-Joburg branch members and non-SAVA members. We thank you for joining this online webinar in amongst all these plethora of webinars that are happening. It does pay to be associated, and if you're not a SAVA member, please reach out to us. As mentioned last month, COVID-19 is getting closer and closer to home, and I certainly hope and pray that you and your families and businesses are coping, are healthy, and are striving during these times. To those directly affected by COVID-19, may things get only better. Tonight's topic promises to be quite a challenge for us GP vets, and I look forward to the talks, which we'll get to shortly. Just some housekeeping rules. Please use the comment box for questions to our sponsor and speaker. The talk is pre-recorded, so both the sponsor and speaker are on hand to answer questions during and after the talk. There's also a chat button on the homepage that you can use, so there's a team standing on by for any technical issues. And a reminder that if you do have connectivity issues, for whatever reason, you'll be able to watch a replay and still receive the CPD points after this evening. A most important thank you to Virbac, who have been planning for the CPD event for some time. And due to turn of events, we're finally getting there. So we look forward to it. Your sponsorship is most welcome, much appreciated, and we value the continued support of industry to the veterinary fraternity. Colleagues, I encourage you, please give the representatives the time of day when they visit your practice. I hand over to Jessie Chalon from Virbac, and a reminder that there are 2 lucky draw prizes from Virbac over and above the sponsorship fee for this webinar. Thank you, Virbac, and the winners will be announced at the end.
Good evening to our colleagues in the industry. Good evening to the vets. Thank you very much, Colin, for this introduction. We appreciate the opportunity to share with the practice a brand new product that we're going to be launching. This is a pre-launch event to provide as much information to the channel and to our veterinarians about Suprelorin. It's an exciting new product, and we're really looking forward to launching and to adding value into the vet channel with this product. So this is a pre-launch event to share information and to prepare the industry for the launch of this innovative product. From my perspective, really pleased to be able to use the new technologies that are available to be able to communicate with the companion vets. Brand new to all of us, so it's all a learning experience. But certainly one of the key elements that we've been focusing on during this COVID period, during this pandemic, is to retain a high level of visibility with our customers, to be present, to try and manage our business as normal as we could. So the use of this technology, the use of this platform to be able to communicate with the vets and share as much information as we can is just wonderful from my perspective. From a Virbac perspective, we've been focusing on the following main things, what we call the main things during these times, that being the health and welfare of our staff and our customers. We've been focusing on business continuity, and specifically we've been trying to work on ensuring that we've had enough stock. And lastly, we've been working on trying to ensure that from a sales perspective that we were ahead of last year. And the basis of that would be to ensure that we have sufficient cash flow to be able to sustain the business. And clearly on all three fronts, we've been able to do that. And we're very grateful for the support of the veterinarians, support of the industry, which has allowed us to continue business as normal as we have been. Just a brief word on the companion part of our business. Virbac has traditionally been very strong in the livestock sector. We have been growing, though. Our most significant growth has come from the companion market, and we remain committed to growing our presence with our companion vets. We've introduced a number of new products over the last 2 to 3 years, and that will continue going forward. This year, we hope to launch 2 innovative new products, and you've seen the first in Vegident, and we really hope that that will make a difference to your front shop and ultimately to the care that you provide to our pets. Then we will also be launching a second new product this year, and that would be in partnership with an innovative partnership with what we would be calling a traditional opposition company. So something brand new that we are exploring, and we look forward to those initiatives for the balance of this year. So really an optimistic outlook for the rest of this year. Then next year, we've got as many as 5 new products that we're going to be launching, ultimately focusing and strengthening our position in the companion market. So we look forward to your continued support. We look forward to working with you to ensure that we deliver innovative products to the pet owners under your care. The balance of this evening will be spent with Kurt, and Kurt sharing his information about Deslorelin and its positioning and its value to the market. So Tracy and the rest of the team will be available at the end to answer any questions. We've also got 2 lucky draws available, one for the vet and the other for the practice. That's available just to again strengthen the participation in this evening's meeting. So thank you once again for your contribution and for your support of Virbac. We remain committed to the veterinary channel as a company, and we look forward to strengthening our partnership and continued growth of the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Virbac and Jesse, and the Joburg branch thanks you once again for the sponsorship. We look forward to using your new product in our practices. Excuse me. It does now give me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kurt de Cramer to you. Once again, we're sorry that this has to be online and not face-to-face. but we appreciate the willingness to go online. Dr. Kurt de Cramer, a brief CV, or brief review of him. He's most recent recipient of the Rick Massey Award of the Joburg branch. He qualified in 1986 and acts as both generalist and specialist theriogenologist in small animal practice. He obtained his PhD on the theme of caesarean section, and the inquisitive mind that he has compels him to continue making a contribution to the science of dog breeding. He constantly researches and solves clinical problems that breeders experience, and I'm sure those of us who've communicated with him will attest to that. He has published a comprehensive reference book on dog breeding, and he was the recipient of the Best Researcher Award by the South African Veterinary Association for 2018. He was also invited as the plenary speaker to the European Veterinary Association, let me get that right, the European Veterinary Society for Small Animal Reproductive Congress that was held in 2019 in Berlin, at which he was the plenary speaker. Dr. de Cramer remains in close contact with his alma mater and through collaboration on various platforms. And being active in private practice, he understands the challenges of daily practice. We hand over to you, Dr. Kurt.
Also, thank you, Colin, for the introduction and the kind words. Today's topic is a very exciting one about the use of Deslorelin, Acetate, marketed as Suprelorin, and its wider applications in veterinary practice. The topic requires us to open our minds to new concepts and rewire our brains to question some old-school routine practices. So sit back, relax, and follow the reasoning behind why we should contemplate introducing a new tool in our practice. And thank you very much to our sponsors. Before we go on to what this webinar is really all about, we have to address the issue of the deeply entrenched conceptions, or shall I say, in some instances, misconceptions. As veterinarians, we have had to address not only matters of veterinary interest, but also matters of public interest. The issue of sterilization in most countries has focused on the evils of unwanted pets and pet abandonment, ultimately leading to overwhelming numbers of dogs and cats having to be destroyed at shelters. Against this background, we have all been taught and informed from each and every angle to sterilize anything that moves, as if sterilization is the panacea to the problem. As time went by, we have all learned more about gonadectomy associated problems. We are now at a point where we have to also consider the health aspects into the rationale when recommending routine procedures. In this webinar, I wish to be the spokesperson for the pet by addressing these deeply entrenched routine practices and offer alternatives without in any way making ourselves guilty of contributing to the problem of pet overpopulation. All of us are familiar with posters as this one used in sterilization campaigns. Now the message that it brings across is to emphasize the need to prevent unwanted litters. And this message is in essence a good one and sound advice. However, to assume that surgical gonadectomy is the panacea to the problem of pet overpopulation and that it is entirely risk-free is just not true. The origin of this spay and neuter promotion flyer does not matter, as they all look the same. It is just a concept that I will question in the context of privately owned pets and some relating matters. And we need to dissect this flyer a bit, because it is part of the deeply entrenched beliefs that we all have. So at the bottom you will see highly recognizable breeds. There's a Boxer, Frenchie, Minpin and so forth. And this creates the impression that purebred dogs are the target of this campaign. It was definitely not intended this way, I'm sure. They just represent dogs and look attractive and cute. But the reality is that 95% of all dogs destroyed at shelters are crossbred and only 5% are purebred. And this is just not a personal observation but accurate reflection of what is published. Popular reports from shelters often quote 20% purebreds, but that never stands up to scientific verification because the staff gets the breeds wrong. Anyhow, the bottom line is that purebreds contribute little to the abandonment problem. Okay, so the flyer says, make the smart choice, spay and neuter. It is certainly the smart choice for the social evil of pet abandonment, but not the smartest choice for the long-term health of the pet. I guess I won't be popular with spay campaigners when I make some statements and reveal the inconvenient truths about pet overpopulation. This is not a local problem, but a global problem. The truth is that hugely funded spaying campaigns have only temporarily curbed the problem and have not stopped the problem. This is what controlled studies have shown, and also what logical observations dictate. This is confirmed by the fact that when you spay and neuter everything in an area and you go back to the same area a year or so later, you are presented with the same old all over again. And the reason you're back to square one is on the flyer, because spaying campaigns just don't get to spay and neuter them all, and then they do indeed add and multiply. And another reason why it doesn't work is because the education part that goes alongside the spaying campaigns don't address the socio-economic problems and general irresponsible pet ownership. In families where there are socio-economic challenges, animal welfare does not feature high at all on their agenda. And lastly, we don't have proper laws, and for those laws we have poor compliance. Generally, we just live in a very law-unabiding society. And you may wonder, why am I rambling on about this? And what is the relevance of the pet abandonment debate to today's topic? Well, it was to make sure that we rid ourselves of this notion that it might be a sin not to immediately spay and neuter dogs, to assure veterinarians that there are responsible pet owners out there where other legitimate options are merited. Ultimately, these owners have a right to choice also, as it is their pet and their money we spend. If we are just prepared to listen to clients, there are many responsible pet owners who make inquiries about alternatives to gonadectomy, and there will be many more if we adequately educate them. Now let's quickly review the alternatives we have, but we first look at what we have been doing so far. The most common form of gonadectomies we have all been performing were ovariohysterectomies. Ovarectomies were reserved for those pets where it was confirmed that they were prepubertal and is popular in shelter environments. For male dogs, we performed castrations, and in some countries injecting sclerotizing agents into testicles is common for welfare situations. When it comes to gonad sparing surgeries, we have some options, each with its associated advantages and disadvantages. Salpingectomy is where you just tie off the fallopian tubes and resect a part, but that is not ideal, as the bitches can still develop pyometria in time and they have a full season every so often. Vasectomy is absolutely ideal for the males, as it does not affect them health-wise and renders them infertile, but it doesn't stop unwanted androgen-related behavior. Hysterectomy, or the so-called partial spay, is where we leave the ovaries intact, but remove the uterus, and although the bitch still swells and allows mating, she is infertile and the bleeding is almost absent, as there is no uterus to bleed from. And hysterectomy is a very attractive solution for breeders that wish to enforce breeding restrictions, because the bitch is rendered infertile without messing around with her endocrine system. Likewise, in welfare settings, the puppies need to be sterilized before adoption because of the very poor compliance to spaying after adoption. I'm interested to see how the concept of hysterectomy in place of ovariohysterectomy in at-risk breeds will be accepted in these settings. Alright, so we're moving on to the use of Deslorelin acetate in dogs and cats. Okay, so what is this Suprelorin all about? It is a GnRH agonist designed as a silastic implant that provides a sustained slow release of Deslorelin acetate. Now, although it's used in just about any species you can think of, it is only licensed for the temporary suppression of androgen-related behavior and fertility in adult male dogs, not intended for breeding. All of us are familiar with microchips, and the Suprelorin implant apparatus is pretty much the same, and the site of implantation is also the same. From the onset, I want to emphasize the following. Firstly, that veterinarians must be adequately informed about the evidence there is that routine sterilization is not the best option for all categories of pets and all clients. Secondly, that there are well-informed clients out there that want alternatives to routine sterilization. Thirdly, The main use of this chip lies within the domain of general practitioners and not theriogenologists or veterinarians with a special interest in reproduction. And lastly, I'm fully aware that there are non-believers in alternatives to spaying and neutering, but I'm 100% convinced that even they will still find the need to use this nifty chip. In order to demonstrate that the use of Deslorelin has relevance to the everyday practitioner, I did the following in our practice. Over the last 3 months, I considered each pet that was a candidate for Suprelorin and put them in either of 2 categories until I got the first 100. And this is what I got. 98% of all uses were for non-reproductive purposes and only 2% for reproductive related matters. What this implies is that each and every practitioner will find a niche for it. Furthermore, I split up the percentages of non-reproductive uses into cases where we could use it for a clinical indication and where the owner would want a chemical castration, and this was around 50-50. To make any sense of further discussions, we need to understand the mode of action of Suprelorin. Now, GnRH agonists, when used in sustained doses, renders the pituitary gland unresponsive and effectively inhibits the pituitary gonadal axis. However, there is an initial period of stimulation which is called the flare-up effect. Because Suprelorin can be used in both sterilized and non-sterilized animals, I'm going to use a series of slides to explain the mode of action in those various scenarios. Okay, so we start off by reviewing the endocrine events in non-castrated dogs. Please follow the red arrows as we go along. Now it all starts off at the level of the hypothalamus at puberty, when GnRH is produced. I added the kisspeptins above, not because it sounds sexy, but because we are bound to hear about this newly discovered kid on the block in the future, but for now we can forget about it. The hypothalamus produces GnRH in a pulsatile fashion. This endogenous GnRH then binds to GnRH receptors. Subsequently, the pituitary gland then produces LH and FSH. And the LH and FSH then kickstart the gonads. And the gonads produce sex steroids in the case of the female estrogen and progesterone, and in case of the male testosterone. And these sex steroids have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus, but the gonads also produce inhibin, and inhibin inhibits the pituitary gland. And with the positive and negative feedback mechanisms all normal and in place, the sex steroids, gonadotropes, and pituitary hormones all remain at physiological levels and endocrine homeostasis is maintained. Let us now have a look and see what happens with the endocrine events when we castrate a dog. As expected, the testosterone levels will return to basal or below. However, by removing the gonads, what also happens is that we remove the negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. What now follows is that the hypothalamus becomes overstimulated. This in turn then results in massively increased concentrations of GnRH. These massive concentrations of GnRH now result in massive release of LH and FSH, with LH levels that may be increased up to 30-fold. Historically, veterinarians were only focused on how castration results in the drop in testosterone. In addition, most veterinarians were blissfully unaware that besides the removal of the sex steroids, castration also leads to these massive increases in LH, and that these increases have clinical implications. In these last couple of slides, we're now going to have a look and see what happens when we use Suprelorin to chemically castrate a dog. What we get is a continuous release of exogenous GnRH. And this continuous release of exogenous GnRH initially stimulates the pituitary gland to produce excess amounts of testosterone, but this is very short-lived, and takes place about a week or so after the implant and lasts for approximately a week. Now here follows a strange paradox. You will remember that when we castrated a dog, that there was a massive and continuous pulsatile release of endogenous GnRH, and that this continuous pulsatile stimulation results in lifelong elevated LH and FSH concentrations. In contrast, when we use Suprelorin, the pituitary gland is continuously stimulated in a non-pulsatile fashion, and that it is this lack of pulsatility that explains the mechanism by which the pituitary gland becomes desensitized and downregulated. What follows is that the downregulated pituitary gland now stops producing LH and FSH. And in the absence of LH and FSH, the gonads stop working and spermatogenesis is arrested. And also, testosterone production ceases, and effectively, the dog is now chemically castrated. However, in contrast to the surgically castrated dog, the Suprelorin implanted dog maintains LH and FSH levels at more or less physiological levels equivalent to those of an intake dog. Okay, so let's summarize the differences between surgical castration and GnRH suppression. When we castrate, we diminish the sex steroids permanently, and LH and FSH remain at very high levels for life. In contrast, with the Suprelorin implant, we achieve the same, but without significantly affecting the LH and FSH concentrations, and it is fully reversible. Let us quickly revise schematically what happens in the surgically castrated dog. You rip out his genitals, it diminishes the sex steroids permanently, but LH and FSH remain at supraphysiological levels for life, and this leads to ongoing bombardment of receptors all over the body responding to the LH and FSH. Because we can use Suprelorin in already spayed or castrated dogs, we need to quickly explain how it works there also. After implantation of the GnRH chip, you get downregulation of the pituitary gland within a period of as little as 3 weeks, and LH and FSH return to normal levels. Now that we understand the endocrinology of gonadectomized dogs, we focus on the health concerns and the link that these problems have with high concentrations of LH. When we think luteinizing hormone, we always think reproductive tissues, but the reality is that there are LH receptors in many extragonadal tissues. And these receptors are widespread all over the body, in just about any tissue that you can think of. And it is currently proposed that the LH hypersecretion, which is continuous and lifelong following spay and castration, causes all these health concerns, and hence now call these conditions LH disease. We do not know exactly what the role of these LH receptors all over the body are, but we do know that they induce cell division and have a variety of other metabolic effects in non-reproductive tissues. Let us have a look at the health concerns associated with gonadectomy in which LH is probably implicated. We start off with the increased odds of neoplasia, which can be increased twofold or more in gonadectomized dogs when compared to intact dogs. And the main neoplasias concerned are hemangiosarcomas, lymphosarcoma, mastocytoma, osteosarcoma, transitional cell carcinomas, and many more. When we get to orthopedic conditions, we are looking at the increased odds of hip dysplasia and a massive increase in the risk of cruciate injury. With regards to metabolic and endocrine disorders, gonadectomy is the single largest risk factor in dogs for developing obesity, and independent of this, it also increases the risk of diabetes, hypothyroidism, and Cushing's. Coat changes are not something that most vets pay attention to, but it is known that gonadectomy causes coat changes in up to 30% of spayed and castrated dogs. This brings us to a real big health concern of gonadectomy. Urinary sphincter mechanism incompetence leading to urinary incontinence in the bitch is the most common spay-associated complication, with a reported prevalence varying between 5 to 20%, and for certain breeds it may approach up to 60%. I want us to realize that the health concerns associated with gonadectomy does not only impact on the pets, but it also has serious impacts on the pet owners. Just try to remember some of your past cases. You have this owner whom had his Rottweiler euthanized at 4 years of age because of osteosarcoma. Others may have had dogs that had to have surgery on a cruciate, and likely his other cruciate ruptured also. And the many dogs we treat with urinary incontinence. I'm not implying that spaying causes all these conditions, and with exception of urinary incontinence, the dogs may very well have developed these conditions, even if they had not been gonadectomized. But here's the thing, some of these clients do indeed learn that the probability of these problems increase with gonadectomy, and hence question our routine recommendation of gonadectomy. And it is for these clients that we need to be better informed to offer alternatives. So let us make some conclusions regarding the health concerns or so-called LH diseases in dogs. Gonadectomy should no longer be viewed as an innocuous sterilizing procedure that only deprives the subject of sex steroids. In addition, it may lead to various health concerns with mounting evidence of supraphysiological concentrations of LH and FSH playing a role in this. I emphasize that gonadectomy is the main contributor to LH disease and not so much the age of sterilization. Remember also that these health concerns are present in all gonadectomized dogs, but much more so in large and giant breeds, particularly with reference to orthopedic problems. I wish to address yet another misconception that arose as more information regarding adverse effects of gonadectomy became known. It started off with publications on how sterilized populations of dogs suffer more from LH diseases. Then later, they started comparing the prevalence of LH disease in dogs sterilized before or at puberty to those sterilized slightly later. The results certainly were that for most of the conditions, but not all, the odds of problems were slightly higher when animals were spayed somewhat early. From this, many in the veterinary fraternity then started latching onto the concept of early sterilization being the culprit. But the fact is that the evidence for this was weak. What is not weak, however, is the differences in odds of problems occurring between the sterilized versus non-sterilized populations, even if they were sterilized somewhat later. In any event, it is to be remembered that all of us sterilize dogs early anyway. This is because dogs get booked in for steries in our hospitals at a young age, and they may or may not have reached puberty at that stage yet. We don't really care, we just sterilize them. The focus on the exact age of that gonadectomy was performed is not nearly as important as the fact that the dog was sterilized, irrespective of whether this happened before, at puberty, or in young adulthood. I'm now moving on to the actual registered use of Suprelorin, which is for the use in mature dogs that are not intended for breeding. Since the manufacturer's instructions are that we should use the implant in mature dogs, we have to define maturity. Puberty is defined as the age at which sexual maturity is achieved and reproduction is possible. Puberty and skeletal development may, however, not be synchronized, with puberty preceding skeletal maturity. Skeletal maturity is deemed to have been completed when the epiphyseal closure of the major long bones is completed. Using this information, skeletal maturity may safely assume to have occurred at 10, 12, 14 and 18 months respectively in small, medium, large and giant breeds. But please note that no specific harm will come to a dog, whether it is a male or a female, if you did implant them before skeletal maturity was achieved. Indeed, I have much less concern about implanting a dog early as opposed to gonadectomizing a dog early. This is because when we use Suprelorin, there will be no LH secretion and thus no increased risk of LH disease. And when we use the implant, it is going to mimic surgical castration. It is going to be reversible, but it's going to be without the supraphysiological LH and FSH concentrations. And just to illustrate how safe it is, how often does it happen that you hear of a product that has no contraindications or no interactions with any other drugs that you may use in the same patient? However, having said that, as a general rule, the use of Deslorelin in non-breeding animals can be considered uncomplicated and safe. Special cautions are prudent for its use in animals intended for future breeding. In practical terms, I'm now going to explain what to expect when using the implant. Infertility and suppression of testosterone is usually achieved within 6 weeks after the administration of the implant in the dorsoscapular area. The registered duration of efficacy is reported at 6 months irrespective of the size of the dog. However, in medium and small dogs it is expected to last around 12 months. When wishing to use it continuously, you do not have to remove the previous implant. Thus far, in countries where Suprelorin has been available for years, the most common use has been as a castration trial. The concept is that the client gets to see what the dog acts like and looks like after chemical castration, which perfectly mimics surgical castration. If they like what they see, they can decide to continue with the implants, or they can progress to surgical castration. If they don't like what they see, they can wait until the effects of the Suprelorin wears off and the dog returns to normal. A castration trial also helps to prove whether a specific behavioral problem will disappear following castration or not. For instance, dogs that have dog or stranger-directed aggression can be implanted, and more often than not, the owner will see that they will still lay into each other and want to bite the neighbor's kid. This is because castration is not the answer in most dogs with pre-existing aggression problems. Following a castration trial, the owner can now make a much better informed decision. Knowing that castration can cause problems, particularly in large breeds, we can use the implant to postpone the actual date of surgical castration. Imagine the case of the little toy pom lap dog. The owner complains that it is urinating all over the house, but has not conceded to castration yet because you had also diagnosed it with a heart murmur and they fear it may die. In these cases are absolutely ideal candidates for lifelong use of Suprelorin. The dog stops its androgen-related behavior and does not need to be subjected to anesthesia and surgery, which are potentially fatal in this patient. Moving on with other clinical uses of Suprelorin, we start off with benign prostatic hypertrophy or hyperplasia in the dog. There is no problem with simply castrating a dog with BPH. However, BPH is a condition which occurs more often in dogs with advanced age, and older dogs may have concurrent disease which may place them at an increased risk of surgery and anesthesia. In such cases, the implant will do exactly the same as castration without having to perform risky surgery and can be safely continued for life. However, before considering the implant as only therapy, the clinician must make sure that there is no other prostatic disease ongoing and that there is no testicular neoplasia. Also remember that Suprelorin should not be used for BPH in breeding dogs as it suppresses fertility, and other more suitable options are available. As was the case in BPH, perianal adenomas are also androgen dependent and castration is indicated, but again, this is a condition of older dogs in which surgery may be a problem. Also, in these cases, the clinician must make sure that the dog does not suffer from cryptorchidism, or testicular neoplasia needs to be ruled out also. Some clinicians might be confused with the issue of at what intervals they should re-implant the dog, given that the company pamphlet insert indicates every 6 months. In large dogs and above, every 6 months should be followed. Despite this, we know from experts that have been using the product for years that they have found another objective indicator. We know that the testicle dimensions such as scrotal width is reduced by at least 30% within as little as 6 weeks from the implant. So what these clinicians do is they measure the testicle width or scrotal width so that they have a baseline. Then they remeasure the scrotal width periodically and they re-implant again only when the scrotal dimensions start to increase again. Perhaps I am making it sound too scientific. You can actually feel and see the changes quite markedly, and so can the owner, and they usually guide the vet when it is time for a re-implant. I have placed a lot of accent on the registered use of Suprelorin versus non-registered use, as if there will be a problem if you use it extra label, which is not so. With regards to the registered or label versus extra label use, the argument is just a regulatory one, where the manufacturer makes claims for a specific purpose. However, we as practitioners are free to use the product on an extra label basis, and we have many publications that guide us where and how we can do so. I have issued a lot of cautions about the use of Suprelorin in breeding animals. This I did because it is generally more complex in breeding animals. The issue of using Suprelorin in breeding animals is more a perceived problem than a real one. Given that you will have few indications to use it in breeding animals anyway, and that its use is complex, I generally do not recommend that you use it unless you have a thorough understanding of when and how to use it, and know what to expect, what the expected outcomes are, and they should be properly communicated to your breeders. But the biggest problem is that many breeders have the tendency to make observations of poor reproductive performance and correlate them to a recent action or veterinary intervention without seeking proof of causal relationship. You might, for instance, implant a bitch, and a year later the bitch develops a pyometra, or she does not conceive, or she has a litter with cleft palates, and they will all tie this back to you having implanted the chip, albeit those things would have happened anyway. There are many more examples, such as accidentally implanting a pregnant bitch. So do yourself a favor and concentrate on the 98% of cases that are relevant to you, where things are a lot more straightforward and very safe. So let me recap the issues regarding the use of Suprelorin for breeding animals. Firstly, you have to deal with the issue of the flare-up effect. The breeders need to understand that the duration of efficacy varies greatly. The very few side effects that have been reported with the use of Suprelorin are all related to reproductive matters. We all know that breeders have high expectations, and that when failing to meet these expectations, many of them will get very upset. Lastly, as I mentioned, breeders have a tendency to blame any unrelated bad thing that happens to a recent action or product on their dogs. I need to elaborate a bit about the use of Suprelorin before puberty. Generally, it is not advised to use Suprelorin before puberty, and neither does it work well in delaying puberty anyway, because you have to use it with even shorter intervals than 6 months to keep on delaying puberty. But it is not critical if you accidentally did put it in a prepubertal dog or cat. It would be nothing different than spaying or castrating an animal before puberty. The main thing that you might observe is juvenile genitalia. There is a lot of talk about long bone growth and early gonadectomy, or the prepubertal use of Suprelorin treatment. And in both cases, the growth plate closure is theoretically delayed, but they struggle to find discernible differences in the size of the dogs because of it. So, just as your puppies spayed before puberty don't become giants, Suprelorin implanted dogs won't become giants either. For those that wish to use the implant in breeding animals, the first thing to remember is that you should change the site of implantation from the dorsoscapular area to the groin or umbilical area. This is because you might want to remove the implant early, and it is almost impossible to retrieve and find the implant underneath thick skin. There is actually little indication for Suprelorin in breeding studs, but it can be used in adult male dogs where the owner wishes to temporarily suppress fertility and male behavior. Depending on the weight of the dog and individual variation, Beyond 6 months, we may have uncertainty of how long the implant may last, and hence retrieval of the implant and removal then allows us to manipulate the duration of efficacy. Although there is a reasonable and realistic expectation that studs will return to fertility, the manufacturer does not claim or guarantee this. There are numerous indications for the long-term or lifelong suppression of estrus in bitches. The first one is for those owners that may fear the risk of anesthesia or surgery. This is often encountered by clients that own a teacup-sized little bitch that spends its entire life with the owner. They do want it sterilized because they wish to avoid the nuisance of estrus in their pet, but they fear that the little creature may not survive surgery because it is so tiny. In these cases, suppression by annual implants is an acceptable alternative. There are also many examples of bitches in which an ovarian hysterectomy is desired or clinically indicated, but they suffer from concurrent medical conditions that may increase your risk of anesthesia or surgery. Classical examples are bitches that suffer from cardiac and renal disease. I will most certainly think twice again before I answer a client that we will be very careful with this patient's anesthesia, and certainly offer them a non-surgical option. Mammary tumors often occur in older bitches with a variety of geriatric problems, rendering surgery almost impossible. In these cases, agdapristone could first be used to ensure that the luteal tissue is removed, also to reduce the size of the tumors, and then followed up with Suprelorin to prevent further estrus cycles. You might be dealing with a diabetic unspayed bitch, which also suffers from a host of other problems. In diabetes, you do not want progesterone floating around because it antagonizes insulin and makes it difficult for you to control the patient. Then there is the bitch which may have an ovarian remnant and you may have failed to solve it surgically. More and more breeders are having hysterectomies performed on puppies before sale. Many of you will see these bitches soon, and their new owners might be your clients and want their ovaries removed later because of estrus-associated nuisance. In these bitches, you can either go digging for the ovaries or just keep them suppressed using Suprelorin. There are certainly clients that will request you to chemically sterilize their bitches because they wish to avoid the so-called LH diseases and request suppression of estrus using the Deslorelin implant and using it indefinitely, or at least postpone surgical gonadectomy until a much later age. When it comes to the clinical uses of Suprelorin in spayed bitches, urinary incontinence features very high. Suprelorin should be considered in cases that are unresponsive to hormone replacement therapy. In these cases, it can either be used on its own or in combo with estriol. Even if your hormone therapy works well, there are clients out there that would prefer a longer term treatment because their lifestyle does not always allow them to administer medicines daily. When you consider Deslorelin for incontinence, you have to inform the owner that it works in around 50% of cases, so results can certainly not be guaranteed. Some medicine specialists have been looking at Deslorelin as a complementary cancer therapy. The premise is that by reducing LH secretion, it will decrease both tumor cell proliferation and metastasis, and ultimately help extend survival times. There is anecdotal evidence to support its use in canine lymphoma in gonadectomized dogs, but more research is required before clear recommendations can be made. The puppy coat syndrome is also a gonadectomy-associated phenomenon, and although common, it is not really recognized by most veterinarians as we just don't pay attention to it. It occurs in around 20% of all spayed and castrated dogs and is more prominent in some breeds. It is reported that Deslorelin treatment helps to improve the coat quality in almost 80% of these cases. So we move on to the use of Suprelorin in breeding bitches. Once it becomes known that Suprelorin is available, there will certainly be many breeders that will ask you about it. Breeders might want to use it because they wish to suppress estrus in their bitches, because a bitch in estrus is not allowed to enter dog shows or working trials. Also, breeders often postpone breeding until the bitch has completed its entire career. The first thing you have to warn the owner about is that the flare-up effect will occur and manifest clinically by showing signs of estrus for a couple of days before suppression is achieved. We can also use this flare-up effect for estrus induction, but this requires much more discussion and is a topic on its own, not relevant to most of us. Assuming that you wish to suppress estrus long-term, you could re-implant the bitch every 6 months, and provided the previous implant is still active, no subsequent flare-ups will occur. When it comes to preventing estrus in queens, a variohysterectomy is still the best option for most queens. But as was the case in dogs, repeated implants to suppress estrus long-term may be considered in pet-owned queens that are at a high risk of anesthesia and surgery owing to underlying conditions. In these cases, the chip is expected to last over 14 months. Also, there is nothing that stops you to use it indefinitely in cats where the owner is concerned about alleged diseases. And as with bitches, it is an alternative to follow-up surgery for ovarian remnant syndrome. Queens are seasonally polyestrous, and you will most certainly be approached by cat breeders that want to suppress estrus for part of the season or the entire season. For cat breeders, you have to inform them that the time to return to estrus varies greatly, and that there is a certain, albeit low, incidence of complications in some queens, such as pyometra and ovarian pathologies. There are probably limited applications for Suprelorin in tomcats. The only exception is for toms with underlying conditions that need to be sterilized. It may also be useful for the crypt orchid testicle that you can't find. In exceptional cases, a cat breeder might want to use it in a tom. I included these images because they really fascinated me, as does the condition called alopecia X. And here we see what Suprelorin did for intake males that were afflicted by this condition. For completeness sake, I added information on the use of Suprelorin in exotic species. In some countries, Suprelorin is registered for ferrets. In some ways, the discussion on ferrets is inappropriate for South Africa, because as I understand, we are not supposed to have intact ferrets in South Africa. Yet, many of us see them. It is used for regression, estrus suppression, behavioral problems, and for the treatment of adrenal disease in ferrets. In rabbits and guinea pigs, it controls estrus for 6 months or more, but in males, the results are variable and often unrewarding. In birds, it is used for a host of behavioral problems, egg laying, feather plucking, and so forth, but you have to remember that there are huge differences in response depending on species and sex. The huge differences particularly pertain to the duration of action, which can vary from as little as 2 months to over a year. The same applies to reptiles, where the duration of action varies from nothing, 2 months only in some species, and up to a year in iguanas. Some animal sanctuaries and rehab facilities use it for chemically castrating monkeys during rehab to control aggressive behaviors, and I am sure that capuchin owners will also request it for regression and fertility control as an alternative to surgery, and there is no harm in trying it. If you surf the internet, you will find that they have tried it in just about every species of the entire animal kingdom. This is probably testament of how safe it is. GnRH have many applications in wildlife, but this is beyond the scope of this webinar. In conclusion, I am convinced we are entering a new era with regards to our thinking of sterilization. A new generation of vets are ready to embrace all sorts of alternatives. This will most certainly be welcomed by many clients. Deslorelin implants not only offers a non-invasive and reversible alternative for many of such clients, but it is also the #1 alternative in the many cases where surgery and/or anesthesia is deemed risky. The many other uses of Deslorelin in the various species is likely to secure a niche in most practices. Thank you to everyone that listened to the end. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to us in the VetLink studio with me and Anya. We've got quite a number of things still to look forward to. Firstly, we're going to have a look at the polls. Then we're going to deal with some very interesting Q&As. And I see I've got some very, very challenging questions over there. And then lastly, but the most important, I think, is that I will be announcing the winners of the 2 book prizes, as well as the 2 hampers that have been won. So I've got the names here and we'll announce them shortly. Anya, I think if we can go to the polls and if everyone can go to the chat room forum there and open up the polls section, and then we can start off with the polls. And over to you, Anya. So we've got question 1 with regards to Suprelorin and its registered use in male dogs. Which of the following statements most closely resembles your sentiments? So you've got the options there. There's no right or no wrong answers here. This is just to get a feel for what's going on. And the purpose of these polls is also for the company and for us to evaluate how effective our webinar was, and if there's any need for follow-up information that needs to be given to our attendees. I'm going to give you another 30 odd seconds before we end the poll. Right, Anya, there's no more movement. If we can end the poll, and I'll make some comments. All right, so glad to see that most of us appreciate the fact that there will be clients that will entertain the use of the Suprelorin. Then very glad to see also that there are people that have identified that there are cases where we can use it for clinical cases, and then the vast majority indeed being pretty happy and seeing that there's a merit in using it as a trial castration, and it resonates with them. Thank you very much, and over to question number 2. So with regards to the health concerns in gonadectomy, my historic opinion has always been, and just give your sentiments there. Right, quite a bit of movement there still between the 3 options. Good. And Anya, if we can stop the polls, I'll see the movement is stopped. There we go. All right. So with regards to too much is made of the health concerns, and we got about a 12 or 15% response there, and I appreciate that. And I would be guessing that we're looking at our older veterinarians and that hold those views. We do not know enough about this. I would forgive that too, because this is just a webinar that just introduces a new product, and it's pretty new to most of us. Just remember that there will be, alongside this webinar, is an extensive CPD article which you can download, and our sponsors will and the VetLink team will provide you with a link where you can download it and then earn a whopping 3 points for the for that article. And then by having read that, I'm pretty sure that we will all be on the same page. Please do not attempt to answer those questions. There's a place on the web somewhere where you can answer the questions. Do not attempt them by just listening to the webinar. You also have to read the article. They're pretty easy, the questions, if you have done so. All right, and then I see that there's a good 47% that have been concerned about sterilization and everything surrounding it and allergy disease. And again, I'm assuming that is the younger generation. Great. Anya, let's proceed to question number 3. Which of the following statements most closely resembles your sentiments? Suprelorin is not permanent, requires retreatment, and I'm concerned about cost. All right, we're making progress on this poll. And Anya, our polls have stabilized. You can end the poll. There we go. Good. So it is not permanent and requires retreatment, and there's going to be a concern about cost. Yes, indeed, and it's up to 50% that have chosen that option. And that is indeed true. But just remember that these people that went and opted for Suprelorin in the first place are the type of clients that are concerned about health. They are fully aware of the fact that this is both reversible and needs to be repeated. And so I don't think your client will be as concerned as you are, but it will definitely be a deterrent to those that will not consider it, for sure. Glad also to have seen that not too many people were concerned about side effects, and as I've tried to explain in the webinar, provided you use it in non-breeding animals, your chances of getting side effects and any interactions really approaches almost zero. And I say almost because it's truly so. And then the other people, the 43 remainders, yeah, they opted for, they have little concerns and they're excited to use it. And I share that view. Anya, let us go to poll number 4. Right, having listened to the webinar on the use of Suprelorin, I've still got some questions. I need more time to digest it all. And I can see the merit clearly. Right. Anya, you can end the poll. Good. So I still had some questions, 9% answered there. And hopefully, once you've downloaded the very extensive CPD article, it's many pages, I hope that most of them, if not all of your questions, will be answered. You need more time to digest it all. I would forgive any attendee for saying that, being a new concept again. You have to go and think about it and ruminate. You can look, and then the last one was, I can see the clear merit for using it for a multitude of cases. Well, that was the purpose of this webinar. Good. Our last poll. Anya, can you proceed? There we go. For those that strongly believe there is a place for Suprelorin in their practice, which of the statements most closely resembles your sentiments? Option 1, intend using it for its registered purpose in males only. I intend using it for its registered and extra label uses in clinical cases. I intend to use it for its registered and extra label uses in clinical cases as well as breeding animals. Right, we've got a stabilized poll there, and Anya, I will comment. Thank you. Right, so I intend using it for its registered use in males only. 88% was the response there. I think once having read the CPD article more extensively, I might be able to convince more than 8% or make this 8% less, may I say, because it is very safe to use extra label in those cases. We've got all the references are in there. It's not like we're sucking something out of our thumb or acting irresponsibly. These things are well published and are done frequently. Good. I intend using it for extra label things as well, which is absolutely great, and that's exactly what I wanted. And then I see there's a courageous 19% that wish to use it in breeding animals as well, and I've got no problem with that, provided you've got a thorough understanding of all the reproductive issues and some of the specific issues with Suprelorin in breeding animals, all the idiosyncrasies, and then also you have to understand cat and dog breeders and know what the expectations are, so that you do not overpromise when using Suprelorin. Good. Anya, I think if we can go over to the chat room, and then I can scroll down on all the questions, and let me go there myself. There we are. And I'm going to start right at the beginning, and I've got some very challenging questions. I'll try my utmost best to answer them all. Good. So we start off with Roxanne. Can you use the chip in crypt orchid dogs? Yes, indeed, you can use it in crypt orchid dogs, but you've got to be very careful now how you go about this. If you are going to use the Suprelorin in a crypt orchid because it presented with a problem related to the crypt orchidism and the neoplasia and the endocrine events and tumors and hormones that are produced by those tumors, that is not a good idea. You first have to exclude neoplasia in the crypt orchid testicle. And surgery is certainly my option number one, but the chip I think would be reserved for cases where you either can't find it or there is some sort of a factor, compromising factor, which prevents you from doing surgery. Another one from Roxanne, can you use this chip safely in birds? Yes, you can, and there's no known side effects. However, your big problem with birds is all the different species, and there's different reasons why you want to use it. You know, for the we've got the egg laying business, we've got the aggression, the feather plucking, and all those. There's no guarantee that it'll work in each and every one of them, but avian specialists use it quite extensively. And the thing is, and the biggest deterrent of using it in these species is its huge variation in between species, and some of them, and that's not dependent on weight at all. It's dependent on the specific species, and the intervals in of the chip implants, between chip implants, varies greatly, as short as 2 months and as long as a year in other species. And I'm not going to go run through the whole species list because there's just too many. Right, are there any side effects to look out for when using the Suprelorin chip? And how easy is it to remove the chip if you need to? There is no specific side effect that you have to look out for when you've used the Suprelorin chip. And how easy is it to remove? Well, let me just tell you, once you've implanted it, in some cases you can feel it. But just like with microchips, it's extremely difficult to palpate it and to try and locate it. So that's why when we use it in breeding animals, or in cases where you might want to remove it, you would use it at the umbilicus, where there's very close to the skin, so that you can easily locate it and you can easily feel it there, or in the groin area as well, directly subcutaneous, where there's very little subcutaneous fat, because otherwise it's going to be a hide and seek situation. Rochelle, I think I've answered the story about the benign prostatic hyperplasia, and most certainly, if you do not wish to do surgery for whatever reason, you can most certainly use it. The only thing there is with the BPH, you would have to exclude, prostatic disease that cannot be cured by castration only, and that would be those ones with the huge prostatic cysts or cysts that have already become infected, and that actually require either a marsupialization or, in the most extreme cases, actually require a total prostatectomy, which is quite risky surgery and difficult. Good, we're moving on. Nicolette, can I use it for the ovarian remnant syndrome in either dogs or cats? Yes, indeed, you can use it for in both species for exactly this reason. If for whatever reason you don't want to attempt the surgery, or you've attempted it before and you couldn't find them, there's no harm in using it. Right, Rochelle. Deslorelin implant used in prostatic hyperplasia. What happens towards the end? Okay, good question. Yes, you do have to respect the implant intervals for the size of the dog, being 6 months in large dogs and 12 months in the smaller breeds, because for sure your prostatic problem will recur the moment the chip stops working and testosterone production resumes. Being an androgen related problem, you need to suppress it all the time, and you would have to use it continuously. But remember also, many of these BPH dogs are older dogs that may have compromising issues, and it's pretty safe to use it till the end of his days. Pamela Brunker, do we have proof that the use of Suprelorin can avoid LH diseases altogether? Okay, so excellent question. No, we do not have proof that the use of Suprelorin can avoid LH disease altogether. we most certainly know that in a sterilized population, we do have a much higher incidence of LH disease. But what we cannot say at this point in time, because we don't have the data, and we're talking about very long-term studies that have to be done over many, many years, over many hundreds of thousands of animals. And this type of information will start coming through as we get more information from pet insurances and pet insured diseases where we have accurate statistically. And maybe in the years to come, Timeline, we'll be able to answer that question for you. But all indications are, yes, for certain LH diseases, we can. There seems to be indications that it is preventative. Bronwyn, so can you use the chip in pediatrics? After they're not more prone to the same side effects as from early sterilization. No, Bronwyn, they would not be if one would really do that. But just remember, when you are talking about using it very early and using it pre-pubertal, you would have quite a bit of a problem to keep on delaying puberty, because if you put that chip in before 4.5 months, you're going to succeed in preventing puberty. But it's not going to last the full 6 months, because that's just not how it works in the pre-pubertal animal. So we also do not have data as to what is eventually going to happen. But one thing is fact, is that early sterilization is going to result in high LH, and Suprelorin is not. And given that the LH is implicated in the LH disease, all suggestions are that there will be some sort of a safety aspect there. Pierre Janssen van Vieren, does Suprelorin cause a flare-up each time? No, indeed it does not, on the condition that you re-implant before the previous implant has become ineffective. And as I said, in dogs, we're looking at 6 months in the large breeds and 12 months in the smaller breeds, and cats is definitely over 12 to 14 months of age. So provided you do re-implant timelessly, you're not going to get a flare-up. Tanya, what about Suprelorin use in cats to avoid estrus? I think that was dealt with. There are some other products that are being used overseas. Unfortunately, one of them is melatonin. It's not available here, so I've personally got no experience, but hear from my colleagues that it is effective. Nicolette wants me to elaborate a bit on how to induce estrus in bitches. Yeah, as I said in the webinar, I think that topic is one that you would have to go and read up in the CPD article. It's a pretty long thing. There's lots of the answer is extensive, and there's lots of little final nuances that you have to look at there. That is going to depend on whether you can have success or not. It's very easy to induce estrus using Suprelorin. It is not as easy to maintain that pregnancy afterwards. So yeah, lots of things to talk about. Do some happy reading there. Bronwyn, which breeds have the high incidence? I think I answered that one. We're looking at the Mastiff breeds. Bull stands out for sure, and then any of the fat, larger breeds. But you can get it in any breed. It's just that the incidence differs in these cases. Roxanne again, is the Suprelorin chip reliable to use in queens to prevent them coming into season for a prolonged period of time? Yes, it is indeed very reliable, up to 14 months. But this may be a hindrance to some of the breeders, and that is why I say, because they want to stop estrus for a season, but not for a year and longer. And that is where you have to put the implant in a spot where you can easily retrieve it and surgically remove it. Very simple, and then we can have a much more reliable return to estrus as a breeder would like. Okay, so now I was not looking forward to this question by Prof. McGrindle, and she's got the answer here that research in communal dogs indicated a lifespan of 3 years in non-sterilized bitches and 9 years in sterilized dogs. How would this be influenced by an implant in these low-income communities? I think the accent here is we're looking at communal dogs, and we're looking at dogs that are free roaming and that are dying because of some behavioral aspects related to reproductive behavior. And I'm pretty much aware of these publications. Yet there are many other publications that show that the differences in lifespan is not nearly as much. And indeed, there's one that says, well, in Rottweilers, that in non-sterilized dogs, they indeed live longer. But it's all got to do with the keyword, whether these dogs are free roaming and they're allowed, and where there's irresponsible dog ownership at play, and whether these dogs are allowed to interact and then lead to, all sorts of causes related to sexual behavior, roaming, biting each other to death, and so forth, being run over, and so forth. That is what has influenced the results there, and these studies cannot be compared properly unless there were controlled situations created. Good. Prof. Criminal's got another one about the tumors in the mammal. I think I've answered that more or less in the webinar, and most certainly in the in pyometra cases, the Suprelorin would have no advantageous effects there, and that is a surgical matter. All right, what happens if it's accidentally injected into humans? I'm no medical doctor, but I think the basic principles apply, and we're going to get pretty much the same, and that's why I made that perhaps not so funny joke about the use in humans. I think it's a good answer to certain problems. Good. What happens if it's injected into a pregnant bitch? So in most cases, actually nothing will happen, but there have been reports of a pregnant bitch not going to term and aborting, but it's most certainly something that you would wish to avoid, and that's where clinical examination comes into play before you do the implant, and that's why this is a product that is registered for veterinarians and has to be under veterinary control. Pierre, the incidence of pyometra. Okay, also a good question. Yes, in both cats and in dogs, it has been reported that this is possible. And in dogs, in fact, there's only one publication that says of one single case. And this was in a case where it was suspected that there was a pre-existing problem of ovarian and or uterine disease. And in the other cases, which are more anecdotal, they've all been in the older animal group. So again, there, make sure that the animal is healthy before it's implanted. And yes, is it possible? It is so, but with a very low incidence. So I do not know anything about Suprelorin in horses, but what I do know is about the use of GnRH agonists in horses and in pigs for war taint and so forth and so forth. But I think that is yet another topic on its own. Right. How does one know how to repeat the implant? I think I've dealt with that one throughout the webinar. Have you ever seen a reaction at the implant site? Yes. Implant reaction sites have been reported just like with any injection, and indeed also with just a microchip. Does it happen often? I think, if I remember correctly, in some of the trials we did, we're looking at a 5% or lower, but that's more or less what I think the answer is. Right. Nadia asks whether this chip breaks down. No, it does not break down. It does not disappear. It sits there inert and causes absolutely no harm. Kirsten Fowles. Will it reduce the sign's duration of estrus if a bitch receives implant while in heat? Very good question whether you can give it in heat. It's not going to do much with regards to the length of that heat. It's that if the heat is ongoing whilst the implant is inserted, it'll take 10 days before it starts working. And then, depending on whether there's progesterone from the existing follicles or not, we will then see what will happen. If there's high enough progesterone, a heat will be prevented. But give or take 3 weeks, all is over, and we've got a dog that has now become suppressed. Dion Kukumur, how does it control incontinence in spayed dogs? The mechanism of action is not exactly known. They suspect that it's got something to do with taking away the effect of the LH and FSH on the receptors. And remember now that in the incontinent spayed dogs, the LH and FSH are extremely high, and so it affects the tone of the bladder via that mechanism, but the exact mechanism is not known. How well does it help in obese animals? Suprelorin cannot reverse obesity. That is a dietary issue, so that can't happen. An unrealistic expectation of the Suprelorin, I would think. Right, I think that deals with most of the questions. I think I've dealt with them all. And right, let's go ahead and see. They've handed me a paper, and I see the paper here. The winners of the 2 book prizes. The first book winner there is Andy Fowler. Congratulations to you, Andy, and also to Brent Searles. And then we've got the Verback hamper winner, which is Mariki Malan, and then also a colleague of ours and does a lot of reproduction there is Natalie Rouget. Congratulations, Natalie. I think, Anya, it is time now to hand over to Colin again. We can do so and continue. And good evening, everyone, and glad to have met you on our platform. And thank you for the very nice question.
Thank you, Kurt, for that very interesting presentation. The question remains, will we or will we not continue to sterilize our pet dogs and cats? That remains to be seen. This presentation is CPD accredited, so please use the link immediately to get your certificate. And we thank you to Verback once again and to VetLink for hosting this webinar. Our next CPD event will be on Wednesday, the 7th of October, and Dr. Greg Irvin-Smith will be speaking on developmental issues in large breed dogs and in growing dogs. It'll be sponsored by Brewinga Ingelheim, so please look out for emails to register in good time. Stay safe, stay warm, stay coronavirus free, and thank you.